Hey everybody, welcome back to God's Plan Your Part. Today we are looking over Jeremiah 46 to 48. So we're only covering 3 chapters today. And we are entering into a new phase or section of Jeremiah where God is going to start to address other nations. Primarily, this book has been concerned with the people of Judah and a little bit about the people from Babylon, the Chaldeans, as they're known in different books. But here we see God's concern for idolatry in all of these other nations. So it's kind of interesting as you track through Jeremiah. You could be seeing God as only concerned with the idolatry in Israel, in Judah, only concerned with that small geographical region. But here the narrative kind of expands. And just today, God is going to be speaking against Egypt, against the Philistines, and against Moab. And so we start to get the feeling that God is very well aware of the idolatrous practices of many peoples, not just the people in Judah. And they don't get a free pass either. So we get continually introduced to Babylon as God's chosen instrument of judgment against idolatry and against the people who practice idolatry. There's in these 3 chapters, certain gods are called out by name. God is talking about his power over those gods, his power over those people, and continually Babylon is seen as God's instrument of judgment against these people. So if you ever feel like God's being a little bit unfair with Judah or God's being a little bit unfair with Israel, maybe these couple of chapters will help you be a little bit more comfortable with the fact that God is a just God, and he is bringing judgment against all these other nations that refuse to recognize him and worship him and follow him. So really what we're finding at the core of this next section, which by the way, this section covers chapter 46 to chapter 51. So when we finish out this section, we're going to be closing in on the end of the book. But this is showing us that God is not only concerned about small geographical regions, but he is concerned about all people of all nations in all places in the world. And not only is he concerned about those places, he's sovereign over those places. He still has control over those peoples, over those governments. We're getting the idea here that God is even in control of Babylon. He has chosen Nebuchadnezzar to bring his judgment against these nations. So he is expanding the reign of Babylon while he is constricting and destroying the reign of all these other nations and all these other false gods. And ultimately, we've read prior to this that God is going to judge Babylon as well for their idolatrous worship. And so God is really just judging one evil nation with another evil nation. And we've talked a little bit about how what really is happening is God is just removing his hand of protection away from these people because they're not, following the way of life that he's commanded. And so it's kind of a unique portion of the book of Jeremiah. It's very specific, like chapter by chapter by chapter judgments on different nations. But I think if you are kind of overwhelmed by all the judgment and destruction, I think if nothing else, it's helpful to see that God is active in many different regions all at the same time, and he's bringing judgment all for the same things. We are called to worship the Lord. We're called to be obedient to him. And when we reach the end of his mercy, there is judgment that comes. And so that is what is being ushered in. That is, in fact, what happened. Babylon swept in from the north and came against all these other nations that had been very strong at one point, but were not anymore. And much of that ancient world became Babylon. And so your part for today is a little bit tricky just because there's a lot in the reading that is specific to these nations at these times. But I think one thing that could be helpful is to remember that God is moving across the world in many different ways, in many different nations and tribes and tongues and cultures. And so sometimes we can get hyper-focused on our own lives and forget that God is moving in a powerful way all around us. And so even though God has been primarily present in the story with Jeremiah, like we've been seeing Jeremiah's perspective, it's easy to forget that God's not only doing things here with Jeremiah, God's doing things all across the known world at that time. And so just like, you could feel maybe forgotten or secluded, just remember that God is moving and working all around you all the time. He is working on behalf of those who love him. He is bringing about good things for those who love him. And he's doing it in a major way. We can see that here in these passages in Jeremiah, but we also believe that to continue to be true today. And so be encouraged by the fact that the God that we worship, the God that we follow, is not a tiny little God stuck in, our area of the world, but it is in fact over all the world and bringing all things to his purposes for his glory. And we worship him because of that. So we'll be back again tomorrow. We'll see you then. Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.